Hello, how are you doing? I hope the year 2022, what year are we in? Yes, 2022. I hope the year has been treating you well so far and that you've read some good books. I have read some really great books so far this year, but I've gone through everything I've read in the past 6 months and picked out 10 books that I think are truly exceptional. You know, when a book just completely grips you and you're so enthralled by it. These books gave me that feeling. I was copying down quotes, I've been recommending them to people, and I'm looking forward to revisiting these books at some point because it's just so pleasurable. Their characters, their stories, their plot lines. Even though some of these books have some very serious subject matter and quite sad situations, you know, they're just so artfully constructed, and they gave me a new perspective on things in a way that I haven't thought about them before. So I think they're really special. So I'm going to go through and talk about each of these books in turn and what makes them so great. But I'd love to know if you've read any of these books and if you agree with my choices or disagree with them or have any other thoughts about these books, or if you want to recommend to me some of the best books you have read so far this year. Please let me know about that in the comments below, because I'm sure there's many great books that I've missed and that I ought to read, so I'd love your recommendations. First off, I want to talk about Percival Everett's novel, The Trees, which I only just read in the past couple of weeks, but I think it's a book that's really gonna stick with me because he gets so well in this story, a balance between humor and horror, because there are some really funny scenes in it, but then there are also some absolutely terrifying scenes because it involves a number of very gruesome murders. It's kind of structured like a pulp detective story in that there's a whole mystery element of a number of murders that are being committed. At first, it seems like these murders must be kind of supernatural in their nature, but then as the story goes on, it becomes increasingly surreal, but also it involves a number of very memorable characters that are brought to life through dialogue, because there are so many sections of this book which are really dialogue heavy and that which bring out the nature of the characters in a way which makes them feel so alive and makes a really big impression and really brings out aspects of their characters through what they're saying, which are kind of unintentional. I mean, there's a number of racist characters that want to say the N-word but then stop themselves because they realize it's not acceptable, and so are kind of unintentionally revealing things about themselves. But there are also two special detectives named Jim and Ed who just have such a convivial relationship that, you know, it's kind of in this tradition of like a buddy comedy in following their story, but then also seriously dealing with the history of racism and a legacy of lynching in America, and how do we deal with that? How do we commemorate and honor people that have died and stop them from becoming statistics? And it's bringing into the conversations that have been raised through the Black Lives Matter movement, and really asking in a quite serious and moving way, how do we deal with this past and how do we carry on in the future? And it doesn't offer any firm answers, but offers this story which just gets you thinking so much in a complex way about all of these issues, while also telling a story that is just so involving. And it does that through these short, punchy chapters. A lot of the chapters are only a few pages long. That it just, I love how that just carries you through the story and brings you into a number of different scenes and places, but which are so sharply observed that you feel completely involved in them. So it's just so well done. What You Can See From Here by Mariana Leky. This is another novel which gets that balance so well between humor and seriousness, because the story follows a girl named Louisa, follows her throughout her life as she's grown up in this small village in West Germany, and her grandmother has this dream about an exotic animal which people in the local area take as an omen of death. And so they're all wondering who might die next. Even though they consider themselves rational people, they still think that this might happen to them, so take preventative measures to hope that they're not the one who dies next. And it becomes this, so there are lots of idiosyncratic characters in this local community that you get to know over a period of time, and I just grew to love so many of them in all of these little details about their lives and aspects of their character, but also it raises these much more serious questions to do with mortality and the end of our lives and the motivation for what we want to do in our lives and who we love, because it follows a kind of love story, a very unusual love story over a period of many years, and but also to do with love between family members and our connection with family members over time, which may grow closer or we may grow distanced from each other. And yeah, looking at all of those different things in such a creative and moving way that I was just completely gripped by this story. It's so warm-hearted and funny, and but like I said, also really intellectual and smart in how it addresses a lot of these issues. And I read this because Ben at his YouTube channel Doom Antidote, he really highly recommended it, and I just absolutely fell in love with it as well. So I hope more people read and enjoy and just grow really passionate about this book as I have. Love Marriage by Monica Ali, and this is another novel which I think is just so warm-hearted in its style. It has a number of different characters that I grew to really care about over the course of the story, and it approaches subject matter in a very thought-provoking and down-to-earth and relatable and approachable way. It's the story of Yasmin, who's marrying a man named Joe, and at the very beginning of the novel, Yasmin takes her parents to meet Joe's mother, so the whole tension of meeting the in-laws, and it follows the story of their different families and how Yasmin's relationship to Joe changes over a period of time. So it's looking at issues to do with modern relationships and the relevancy and changing institution of marriage, but also things to do with cross-generational misunderstandings, as well as cross-cultural misunderstandings, and things to do with the modern medical profession in England today, because Yasmin is training to be a doctor, and so it gets a lot into her profession and struggles in her profession, which I think is very relevant to the country today. And but also, yeah, following her character over a period of time and how she grows to really think about things from a different perspective and see a lot more complexities in life and in her relationships, both with her fiance and her family, and how her character changes over time. I just loved following her journey, and this cover I think is just so beautiful. Young Mungo by Douglas Stuart, and this is the story of two teenage boys in rural Scotland in the 1990s. There's Protestant Mungo and Catholic James, and they become star-crossed lovers because of the sectarian conflict of that time. And the way it follows their story and their journey, it's so well structured in that it's following a fishing trip that Mungo is going on, but then it is flashing back to the past and how he got to this point in his life. And the way it follows the development of their romance is so passionate and moving, but then also the conflict that comes between them, the barriers that exist, which are inhibiting their natural development and their relationship becoming solidified and being able to develop in a way that is natural because of the prejudices of the time, both religious and to do with their sexuality, and how he follows that is just so moving and heart-wrenching and beautiful that I would just felt completely involved in this story and think it's just wonderfully done. Paradais by Fernanda Melchor, and this story is so enthralling because the narrative has a real intensity to it. It just completely grips you and doesn't let go as you follow the actions and the thoughts of the main character named Polo, who works this kind of dead-end job as a groundskeeper at a privileged upscale gated community, and the resentment he has about that, and his connection, this kind of convenient friendship he has with the son of one of the households in this community, and this son named Franco, who's a really odious boy, but how they form this connection with each other and hatch an evil plan over the course of the story, and then take action on that. It's so gripping and terrifying, but completely puts you in the minds of these boys who feel that they have nothing to lose and so decide to take drastic actions. And but how she shows and represents the way that these young men feel that they have no other options in their lives and that they've been kind of cornered into taking these extreme actions is so well done and makes you really think about these issues in a way that is slightly uncomfortable, but is also so fascinating and that is really enlightening. And so I just think this is such a powerful book, especially because it is so short. It just packs quite a punch. Build Your House Around My Body by Violet Kupersmith. And this is another novel that is like difficult to classify because it's part a crime story, part a ghost story, but mainly just a kind of puzzle of a book with a mystery or many mysteries at its center, which you just want to disentangle and know more about. And so I found it so fascinating to follow and to see how it all fit together. It's mainly the story of a young woman named Winnie, who is an American with Vietnamese heritage, and she travels to Saigon there to become a teacher, and she's not a very good teacher. But then she gets drawn into this whole mystery involving a rubber tree plantation and snakes which inhabit this space, and the whole history behind this space and to do with colonization. And so yeah, a really fascinating history, but moreover it's just such a wonderful like puzzle of a book. There's so many elements of it which are really funny or quite disturbing and thought-provoking. It's in some parts it's like a nightmare, but other parts it's just this like wonderful character study and a fascinating history of a particular place. And so yeah, I was so glad to read this book, which was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and my friends Matthew and Anna James like really highly recommended it to me. So I was so glad that I finally read this book. The Colony by Audrey Magee, and this takes place on a remote Irish island where the native Irish language is still spoken there, but it's steadily dying out as English is becoming increasingly spoken, and foreigners come to visit this island. So there's an Englishman that's an artist that comes to stay on this island and produce some new paintings, and there's a Frenchman who's a linguist that comes to study the people of this island and how their language is evolving and how it's being preserved, or how the preservation of that language is being lost over time. So it is about the process of colonization, but also to do with the sectarian conflict, because there are scenes which are shown, brief scenes of violence that are shown, and of different instances of this conflict, and people, local citizens that get unwittingly or purposefully drawn into these conflicts. But it's mainly about the residents on the island and the clash between these two foreign individuals that come to stay on this Irish island. And the way it shows their story is so dynamic and interesting. There's a young man named James, an adolescent boy that lives on the island, that it feels sort of caught between the past and the future of the island, and how it follows his story is so heartrending and beautiful. I think it's so moving, but also it begins with this fantastically funny scene of the artist, the English artist, traveling to this island, and how he wants to go to the island in a traditional way on a boat, but how it's incredibly unstable and it makes him seasick, but he's determined to do this traditional method of approaching the island. And the way she captures that scene is just so funny. It's one of the best openings to a book that I've read for quite a while. But yeah, this whole story as a whole, I think, is so moving and thoughtful and artfully done, and raises so many questions while also creating so many wonderful characters that I just think it's an incredible accomplishment. Elena Knows by Claudia Pineiro, and this story, the way it completely draws you into the point of view and the experience of its main character, Elena, who is an older woman that is living with Parkinson's disease and who finds her mobility seriously limited because of that, but how she is completely committed to finding out what happened to her daughter, who was found hanging dead in a belfry, and how she is convinced that there was wrongdoing behind this, even though the local authorities say that this was a case of suicide, but she doesn't believe that, and she wants to investigate it and find out what really occurred, but how this is so difficult for her because of her medical condition, and the way it follows her experience, and how her point of view, how she is literally just looking at the ground a lot of the time because her neck muscles have ceased to work, and how she has to so carefully time her medication in order to even walk or move, and how it follows her journey, which is a relatively short journey, but which is very long because of her condition. I think just shows you so much about the experience of people that are suffering with these conditions, which we may dismiss and not think about until we realize the actual immediacy of what that means and the consequences of that, the hardship it causes, but also the hardship for people around it, of carers that are trying to help people with these conditions, but also the way this novel addresses political issues to do with abortion, which have sadly become very relevant in countries like America, where there were big changes that occurred, even though this is set in South America, where these issues are still being debated. So I think it's a novel that is surprisingly and sadly relevant, but which is also so powerful in how it's written, and also really gripping because you want to know what happened to her daughter. What is the mystery behind the events that occurred at the very beginning of the novel. So it is a book that is so well done and so powerful, and that has really stuck with me. Bolla by Pajtim Statovci, and this novel has haunted me in a way that other books don't usually do, and I think because it's kind of challenging in a way how its main character of Arsum, he's a man that makes some very despicable choices. He does some horrible things, so it's very unlikable in a lot of ways, but through the narrative structure of this and how the story plays out, I think you can kind of see how he's been cornered into a situation which causes him to make some really bad choices. And so the story follows him in the 1990s, and he's Albanian, and he gets he's forced into this marriage and pressured into this marriage by his family, which he doesn't want to be a part of. But then he meets over the course of one hot summer a man named Milos, who's Serbian, and they have this fling, and their relationship would develop in under normal circumstances in a kind of natural way, but it's halted because of circumstances to do with their sexuality, but also their nationality, because the Kosovo War occurs and they're split apart from each other, and Arsem desperately wants to recapture their relationship, but that's not really possible because many years go by and certain events occur, and it's very dramatic how it follows that, and it's so artfully constructed how this is told in three different distinct narrative styles. There's following Arsem's story, but then also there are journal entries, which you gradually discover who is writing these entries and the circumstances behind that. But then there's also this kind of mythological, like religious story, which is told in different sections as well, and in very short parts. That's just a small element of the story, but it builds into this larger meaning, which accumulates over the course of the story, and it's just so well done, and has made me really think about things, this very uncomfortable subject matter in a way that I've not really approached it before, and so yeah, this is a book that's really stuck with me. And finally, I want to talk about the novel The Swimmers by Julie Otsuka, which is a book I only just finished reading, but it is so powerful, especially because it is such a short book, but it is so well done. It really caught me off guard. The first section of it is narrated in this collective we voice of a group of swimmers that attend this local underground pool, and how they form this sense of community amongst themselves, even though they come from very different backgrounds. They have all different sorts of issues going on in their lives, but they develop this common behavior and ways of interacting with each other or respecting each other's space in this area of this pool, and so form this kind of culture that is removed from the rest of society, and which they all find really life-enhancing in their togetherness. But then it goes on to tell the story of one of the members named Alice, who is developing dementia, and they're all very aware of this and that they need to be respectful of her, but it gets to a point where she can't take care of herself, so she's taken to a facility by her daughter, and she has to become accustomed to this new environment. And the way it shows that story and approaches it from a number of different ways, of her being inducted into the rules of this new housing care facility, and the impact it has on her daughter, and the impact it has on her as she adjusts to this new environment and is very disorientated, is so moving and powerful that yeah, this book is just incredible and very moving, and but also so well observed. Just small descriptions, I think, tell you so much more about these characters' stories than a much longer narrative, and so it's just incredibly well done, and yeah, I'm just so excited having just finished reading this book. So those are all the books I'm going to talk about. Like I said, yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts or feelings about any of these books. I'd love to know about that in the comments below, or if you're eager to read them now that I have talked about them, please let me know about that, and let me know about any books that you have read this year so far that have really struck you and that have really stuck with you, that you think do something really special. I'd love to hear about that as well. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.